Did the president even know about these pardons? Was his legal signature used without his consent or knowledge? There are Biden officials from the previous White House who raised those questions and wondered if the president was even consulted about his legally binding signature being signed onto documents.
White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt, they're responding to President Trump, saying pardons issued in the waning days of the Biden presidency are not valid. Trump says some of those who received the pardons are subject to investigation at the highest level. Members of the January 6th committee, Biden's family, and former top government officials all got pardons from Biden, who said he feared they would be unjustly targeted by Trump.
So I just saw that Trump is threatening the January 6th committee again. Listen, he's obsessed. He's more obsessed with me and Liz Cheney than his frickin' golf score. Hey, Trump, bring it on, dude.
Joining us to discuss this and more, Julia Manchester, national reporter here at The Hill. Now, President Trump says that these pardons issued by President Biden are not valid because they used an auto pen. I admit I had to look up over the weekend what an auto pen is. Apparently, it's a machine that is used to mimic the signature of somebody like a president. Is there any reason to believe that an auto pen was used to make these pardons? And even if it was, is there any reason to believe that would negate them in any way?
As far as I know, no. I mean, we haven't really heard this come up before, really, and this is a way for the Trump administration, obviously the president, to challenge these pardons, to maybe find a way around them. So I guess we are in, a bit of unknown territory here in terms of what happens next. But as far as we know, those pardons were official by Biden. I think we'd have to go back to past presidencies, past administrations to see what kind of pen was signed. I'm curious to see if this goes to court, how far it goes, but clearly President Trump trying to get around a number of these pardons.
Apparently they've been used for decades. I went on a deep dive looking into that, but it's not a new thing. It'd be interesting to see if this actually gets any traction when it's challenged. It strikes me that during the confirmation hearings for Trump's nominees to the Department of Justice, FBI, they said they weren't going to target the people that were perceived as Trump's enemies. But it sure seems, we saw that Truth Social post from President Trump, that they could be subject to investigation. It sure seems like that's what Trump is getting at here, especially as it pertains to the January 6 members.
It's what Trump wants to get out at here. Look, when those, then cabinet nominees, now cabinet officials, were in front of Congress, they were speaking to a bipartisan group. They were speaking to a nationwide audience. Of course, they were going to moderate their messaging. But at the end of the day, President Trump has this mindset of whatever I want goes. You have to do whatever I say, prove your loyalty to me. And when it comes to these pardons, people, who President Biden pardoned, etc., President Trump wants to get around that. January 6th in particular, a very, very dear issue to President Trump's heart in terms of, the rioters, the protesters who were arrested. We know that in the House, there's a lot of support for this, particularly among House Republicans, and sort of investigating the original January 6th committee.
Yeah, Republicans have released a list of 26 House Democrats that they plan to challenge in the coming midterm election. 13 of them are in Trump districts, New York, California, heavily on the list, Hispanic districts as well. What did you make of that list that came out, and does it tell us anything about where Republicans think they're at?
Look, each year we see that these lists get smaller and smaller because we see that each House district on the Republican and Democratic side becomes much more homogeneous. They're much more partisan. So look, I'm not surprised that the 13 districts that President Trump won, that these members were able to get elected in, are on that list. But look, it's goes to show that the NRCC is continuing to target a number of the same districts they've targeted in the past. But it's we've seen some of those members who, for example, the DCCC, the House Democratic campaign arm, who they would consider vulnerable, aren't necessarily on this list. So some overlap there.
Some new polling from CNN shows the dismal state of public opinion for the Democratic Party. Only 29% of respondents have a favorable view of Democrats. Republicans aren't much more popular, only 36% favorability on their side. Newsflash, people don't like politicians. But what I did find interesting from Democrats is that their lack of support often comes from people that are actually Democrats. They are lagging in support by people who identify as Democrats.
Well, it's interesting. I'm curious to see how the events of last week, last Friday, play into this. Look, there was a lot of hard feelings towards Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and a number of the Democrats in the Senate who voted for that continuing resolution to keep the government open. There's a lot of Democrats that feel that that was essentially caving to the Trump administration. So, it goes to show that there clearly is this disconnect between leadership and members of the party. Now, I would say among Democratic leadership, there's clearly a disconnect, among leaders there. You have Hakeem Jeffries not necessarily rushing to Schumer's side here, but it's indicative of a problem that a lot of Democrats see with the status quo. They want change.
President Trump is going to be speaking with Russian President Vladimir Putin tomorrow over the phone. They're going to be talking about the war in Ukraine. Here's President Trump previewing the call last night on Air Force One.
We have something to announce maybe by Tuesday. I'll be speaking to President Putin on Tuesday. And a lot of work's been done over the weekend. We want to see if we can bring that war to an end. Maybe we can, maybe we can't, but I think we have a very good chance.
Trump went on to say that there had already been discussions about dividing up certain assets. That's concerning language to people who think Trump is selling out the Ukrainians in these peace talks. Any idea what's going to be on the agenda for this talk?
Well, look, we know that President Trump wants to get Vladimir Putin to agree to that 30-day ceasefire. Vladimir Putin has been very vague in terms of the actual terms of the agreement. He said, well, a lot of it depends on, the subject at hand, referring to Ukraine. So I'm curious to see whether Vladimir Putin is going to go into this expecting to get Ukrainian land out of this. I imagine that's going to be discussed. You're going to hear about power plants being discussed in the region, but this is about President Trump getting Putin to the table. But look, this is a give and take kind of situation. I think you're probably going to see, and you've kind of seen President Trump telegraph this, that maybe potentially it is expected that the Ukrainians may have to give something up if Russia gives something up. We'll have to see. It's
interesting to watch members of the Trump administration. They seem to be kind of taking Putin at his word that he's sincere about these negotiations going into them. European leaders, though, they think that he's totally not telling the truth about his intentions for what he plans in Ukraine. They're talking about this new $40 billion aid package, a coalition of the willing European countries that are willing to continue helping Ukraine. Is Trump going to be able to keep the Europeans on board as he moves forward with these negotiations if they're seen as too pro-Russia?
Well, it's unclear because Europe doesn't want to go along with pro-Russia agreements. Remember, pro-Russia stances. Remember, Europe looks at this as a defense issue. They are much closer to the conflict in Ukraine. They are afraid of increased Russian influence. If they don't stop with Ukraine, if they were to move into a country like Poland, for example, they want to be able to put a stop to Russia there. So I think you're going to see the Europeans take a much more hardline stance than Trump does.
Lots happening all over the world. We'll leave it at that. Julia Manchester,
thanks
so much. Astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sunny Williams, who have been stranded in space for months, are finally coming home after a new crew successfully docked Sunday at the International Space Station. NASA saying the astronauts could be back down to Earth as soon as Tuesday evening. News Nation's Caitlin Becker has the latest on their return.
Well, Drew, the one ultimately calling the shots here is Mother Nature. So when the astronauts finally leave the International Space Station is a question of when is the weather the most optimal. NASA reporting Sunday that their team, along with a team from SpaceX, are now targeting an earlier return, quote, based on favorable conditions forecasted for the evening of Tuesday, March 18th. Now, the plan had been to bring Butch and Sunny, who've been up there for 9 months, remember, to bring them home Wednesday. But the agency is anticipating less favorable weather later in the week. And it just seems they're really trying to mitigate the risk of any further delays. So here is how this will all play out. Today, SpaceX Crew 9 will spend time completing handover duties with Crew 10, making sure they're prepared to run the space station. Then just before 11 o'clock tonight, Eastern Time, the hatch on the return capsule will begin to be closed. Around 1 a.m. Tuesday, undocking is set to begin, which starts the journey to Earth. By 5-ish Eastern Time on Tuesday, NASA anticipates the capsule to do what's called de-orbit burn, Thrusters will be fired to reduce the capsule's velocity, causing it to stop orbiting and start heading for Earth. At that point, 2 parachutes will be deployed to stabilize the capsule, and then 4 more will be used to slow it down further. By dinner time on Tuesday, the capsule should have safely splashed down off the Florida coast, meaning Butch Wilmore and Sunny Williams will finally be on the Earth after a very, very long business trip. Back to you, Drew.
News Nation's Caitlin Becker, thank you. At least 39 are dead across 5 states after a line of severe weather battered the mid and southern U.S. over the weekend. The unusually vicious storms brought rain, tornadoes, and even wildfires and dust storms. Take a look at this video. As many as 85 separate tornadoes touched down across 9 different states. Arkansas, Missouri, Mississippi, and Alabama were some of the hardest hit by those twisters. High winds also fueled more than 130 fires across Oklahoma, and a dust storm in Kansas claimed 8 lives in a highway pileup involving at least 50 cars. President Trump says the government is monitoring the situation and is ready to help state and local officials with recovery. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.